Okay, the recording is going. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to explore, and I'm going to be letting people in as we go as well. Okay, we're going to be exploring how budgeting, forecasting, and financial reporting are not just compliance exercises, but they are tools for bringing your school's vision to life and demonstrating responsible stewardship of public funds. So as we're going through this presentation, I am hoping that you're not going to see it just as a rehashing of budgeting and best practices, which it may at times feel like we are, as well as other things. But I want you to think of yourself as an equal partner in bringing the story of the schools you work with to life through the work that you do. And I also want you to think about the work that you do um, as being the part that you play in helping to ensure that the boards you serve are fulfilling their financial responsibilities for the school. So I'm kind of wanting you to see it in a new light, not just that exercise. We have to do the budgets every year. We have to do these things every year, but really think about them through those eyes that you're telling the story of your school and you're helping your board to fulfill their responsibilities to the school at the same time. All right, and actually before we get started on that, I wanted to show you something here. As I'm sure that you've all heard, there's a trend in public education in Utah right now that the number of students in public education has been dropping over the past few years. And as that has happened though, enrollment in the charter schools has been growing. And so I just kind of wanted to look and see how that actually looks in our charter schools. So I've got this little chart here for you that I did. And I took the last 4 fiscal years and I looked at them. I didn't go back any further. A lot of that was just due to the COVID impact. And I didn't want to bring that in. But I figured 4 years was pretty good anyway. So as you can see from this chart, the maximum authorized seats in charter schools has been increasing over the last 4 years, with a slight increase from 23 to 24, and then those growing increases over the next couple of years. And we have been actually, I think the state charter school board has been the only authorizer that's been authorizing schools over that period. And we've actually been authorizing about 2 schools per year. We do have for 2028, though, we just authorized another 5 schools. So we keep adding schools to the mix as well. So we're getting more students, we're getting more schools. Let's look at that next. If we look at that next column, it shows you how many students are actually enrolled in the school. So as you can see, there's quite a few more seats available than the actual enrollment in the schools. And then I wanted to kind of show you as well the changes over the years. So we can see that trend is going on as the maximum authorized is going up from the previous year. We see that the actual enrollment in the charter schools is going up at a smaller rate than those seats are increasing. But as I looked at it, I did notice over those 4 years that the percent of max enrolled that are the percentage of maximum that are actually enrolled within the schools is staying at that steady rate of about 88 to 81%. So I just found that interesting that that's kind of been a steady thing as the schools are growing. Now, what this means for your school, I don't know. It's going to depend on a lot of factors on where your school is located, schools that are closing down in your area, schools that are opening in your area, just a lot of factors, but I just kind of found it interesting that it's pretty much staying steady about that 80%. And I kind of wanted to show this just because we are talking about budgeting and enrollment plays into budgeting. But like I said, found it interesting as well. All right. So we'll go ahead and move on. So going back to our topic of telling the story of your school through your budgeting, forecasting, and reporting practices, let's start by talking about vision and values. So I really want you to think of your budgets as mission documents. The budget is not just a bunch of numbers. It is your school's priorities in numeric form. And the goal of the budget is to bring your school's vision to life. So as part of that is ensuring that your financial plan reflects what is promised in the charter agreement. And if you haven't read the charter agreements for the schools that you serve, I highly recommend that you do that, just so you know what those promises are that are made within that agreement. In the agreements, there's a lot of legalese, and you can just go ahead and skip over that and just focus on those promises that are made in the charter agreement if you choose to read it. In order to ensure that those promises are reflected in the budget, you need to ensure that the promised programs are funded. So if literacy intervention, arts programming, or STEM focus were promised in the school's charter, then you need to make sure that those programs show up clearly in the budget. And you also want to make sure you're budgeting based on reality. You want to make sure that that budget is not it's based on reality and not hope. Sorry. And then you also to do so, you are going to need to use your enrollment trends to make sure that you understand what they are and have been for your school, as well as what's going on in the community around you. You need to think about things. Are there schools opening? Are they closing around you? What's the population in your area? Is it growing older? Is it growing younger? Is it growing at all? And if you're an online school, some things that you want to think about is you want to understand the trends for online education in Utah. Is the desire for online education in the state increasing or decreasing? Understanding the community within which you're operating is an ongoing process. It does not end once your school is open. So you want to also make sure that you are forecasting, and you also want to make sure that you're forecasting your enrollment conservatively. Even small changes in your enrollment can lead to budget deficits in your school if your budgeting is not done appropriately. So keep that in mind. The next thing you want to do is you want to avoid aspirational revenue assumptions. An example of this, let's say that your school that you serve, it operates a fundraiser every year. And as your budget is being prepared, someone determines that in order for you to balance your budget, the school needs to receive an extra 20% from its fundraising efforts, but they haven't made any plans to make any changing in the fundraising approach. And if the given trends in your school's past fundraising efforts, if according to those, a 20% increase is not reasonable without a substantial change in the school's fundraising approach, then a 20% increase in fundraising revenue should not be included in your budget just to make it balance. Budgets that are built on lofty goals can create instability for your school. So every number that you are putting in there for, especially your revenue, you want to make sure that's based on reality. And not as just especially your revenue, it's important in your expenses as well. But if you miss that revenue target, and you don't have an opportunity to adjust those expenses as you need to, that could really cause some problems for your school. So you want to take the time to gather accurate data. Make sure you start your budgeting process early enough that you have time to make informed decisions about your budget. Look at your historical spending patterns, understand your fixed versus your variable costs, and review prior year actuals. Are there things that you missed or under budgeted for during the year that you need to find adequate funds for in the upcoming year? Or did you maybe over budget in an area that you can put those funds to better use elsewhere in the upcoming year? Make sure that you're looking at those kind of things and as you're creating your budget so you can get the most accurate budget possible. Now let's talk about operating budgets versus capital budgets. and why, if you haven't incorporated a capital budget into your work, that you may want to do so. The operating budget is about keeping the school running for this year. And the budget is paid out of your current year revenues, and it needs to be balanced each year and is highly tied to enrollment. And paying for long-term assets with your operating funds can strain your cash flow. So you generally need to find other ways to pay for those items, even if it's from reserves. So the things that are included in your operating budgets include your salaries and benefits, your supplies, utilities, debt service, as it is an ongoing obligation, even though it may be tied to capital decisions, it is an ongoing part of your operating budget. And then, of course, you have your other day-to-day expenses in there as well. So for your capital budget, that's about, that's about investing in assets that last many years. It is long-term and strategic, and typically, for large one-time investments. It may be funded by debt, grants, or out of your reserves. These items are meant to be paid entirely out of one year's operating revenues, as doing so can lead to strain on the school's cash flow, as I mentioned before. So the things that you include in capital budgets are buildings, major renovations, long-term assets, those kind of things. And keep in mind that your capital choices can affect your operating budget every year in terms of debt service, utilities, maintenance, insurance, and staffing implications. So remember, operations keeps your school running this year. Capital ensures that your school exists 5 or 10 years from now, and both of them need to be forecasted. Let's talk about understanding your funding sources. You know what these are. I'm not going to spend much time on them. They're your state funding, which is generally enrollment-based, your federal grants. One thing I will say there, with the current administration, things have been really iffy. So you want to make sure you're following what's happening with these funds to see so that you can make the best decision as you're budgeting for them. And then you have your local and your private funding, and your private funding is generally in the form of grants and donations. Another thing with regard to this funding that you do want to make sure you know, though, is you want to make sure that for all of your funding sources, you know what the requirements, the restrictions and the reporting requirements are for those. Some key questions for you to ask regarding your funding sources are: what triggers the payments for those funding sources? What restrictions apply on the way that you're able to use those funds? And what reporting is required for them? So we're going to talk a little bit more about restriction and compliance now. So you want to make sure that you're tracking your restricted funds separately from the rest of your funds, and a strong accounting system is essential for you to do this. And you want to record your expenses against the proper funding sources as you go. You don't want to have to reconstruct this later, as things could be missed. So make sure that these expenses are recorded properly as they occur. And then the next thing you want to make sure is that you understand the allowable uses of all your funds, because you don't want to get stuck in a situation like a school was a few years back, where it was determined that the school had not used its funds properly, and they ended up paying back a significant amount of funding because of that. So make sure you understand those allowable uses. All right, the next thing is you want to monitor your grant deadlines to ensure that you don't miss them, as this could lead to a loss of funding if you do. Next, let's talk about budgeting for a surplus. When you're doing your budgets, you want to avoid break-even budgeting. This creates structural risk for your school. While I've heard of schools that actually will use break-even funding as a starting place, it's definitely not where you want to end. make sure that you are building those surpluses in. Some recommended surplus, if it's usually typically around 2 to 5% for an existing school. For a new school, we recommend 5%, and this is basically due to the additional risks faced by new schools and the lack of accumulated fund balances that they have. So keep in mind with surpluses, they are not profit. It builds reserves and stability for your school. And new schools especially need this margin of protection. And let's talk about building reserves. So your surplus is for the year. Your reserves are what you are accumulating over a period of time. So building reserves. You build reserves to protect against volatility in enrollment from unexpected expenses and to support the inevitable facility and capital needs of your school. Suggested rates here are for new schools, it's 5 to 10% of your operating expenses, as this provides a safety cushion in the early stages of operation. For established schools, the amount is going to depend on your school's risk profile and factors such as do you own or rent your building? Are you a brick and mortar school versus a virtual school? And what kind of debt obligations do you have that will affect the reserves needed by your school? If your school's reserves are not growing, it is recommended that you ask the following questions. Can revenues somehow be increased? Can we trim our expenses? Are our staffing levels aligned with our enrollment? If your reserves are not building, adjustments to your budget really need to be made. You need to build those things in for any future contingencies your school might face. Now let's move out of budgeting and into forecasting. So forecasting, what is it? So forecasting answers the question, given knowing what we know today, where are we going to end up? When you're forecasting, you want to make sure you're using your year-to-date actuals, and you want to make sure you're using updated assumptions based on what's currently happening in the school. And as you look at those things and look at those actuals, prepare your assumptions, this will lead you into what you project the school is going to have for its year-end results. That's what forecasting is. So forecasting versus changing the budget. When you are doing your forecast, when you are going through this process, what you don't want to do is you don't want to be changing your budget all throughout the year. You want to preserve that original budgeting intact. Now, depending on what's going on with your school, there may be a time during the year that you need to update your budget to meet the compliance standards for the state, but you should avoid constantly rewriting the budget throughout the year. If you keep changing your budget, you lose accountability. Instead, keep that original budget intact. And then you want to forecast on an accrual basis. And you want to do this because it accurately reflects the financial performance of your school. It aligns with the audit standards, and it prevents timing distortions from masking structural financial issues within your school. So you should be forecasting for both your operational and your capital budgets. And as you're doing your forecasting, you want to document what your assumptions are. And you want to do this because it helps preserve accountability as well as improving transparency and helping manage the school's risks and strengths in future financial decision making. So you want to keep in mind that the forecast explains the variance, your forecast is going to explain your variances, but changing your budget throughout the year is actually going to erase them. And that's why it's so important that you keep it intact. And also in forecasting, communication is critical in making sure that your forecasts are accurate. Therefore, the school administration must notify the business office of any financial impact decisions that are being made. They need to share enrollment changes immediately, and they need to communicate staffing shifts with your business office as well. Accurate forecasting depends on timely information. If you are finding that your administration of the school you serve is not providing you with timely information, then I recommend just having a conversation with them. Just tell them, letting them know, hey, these are things that you need to be aware of throughout the year so that you can make those accurate financial forecasts for the board. Next, financial reporting. Financial reporting should tell the school's story. It should demonstrate how the financial resources of the school are supporting its mission. They should connect the financial performance of the school to its operations. And reporting should be timely and understandable in order to support informed decision-making. Financial reporting should translate the numbers of your school into meaningful insight for your board. What should you include in your financial reports? Well, your income statement, that's where the board is going to see the actual versus the budget versus your forecasts. And then they should see a balance sheet that allows them to compare the financial position of the school across periods. And then a cash flow summary with projections. This helps the school to determine if they have enough cash on hand to pay it for their obligations as they come due. The summary should show things like current cash, projected inflows and outflows, the lowest cash point, and whether the school remains above the minimum liquidity target that it has. Some questions to ask as you're reviewing your cash summary are, can the school meet its upcoming payroll? When is the lowest cash balance? Are debt payments covered? Even if the school looks solvent on paper, you want to make sure that your upcoming obligations will be covered. Also, it is recommended that the summary include a minimum of 3 to 6 months projections, just so you can see that the school is able to meet those obligations as they are coming due. And let's talk about the role of a dashboard in all of this. A dashboard provides a quick snapshot of the financial health of the school. It also can provide early warning signals to the school if it may be approaching financial distress. And it is recommended that dashboards are kept to one page. Governance requires clarity and focus and decision-making efficiency, not volume. So a dashboard extended beyond one page often shifts from a risk monitoring tool to being what we would call a data dump. Some possible dashboard components includes a metric on enrollment. This is because enrollment is the main factor in determining the school's income. So it's important to include a metric regarding the enrollment, such as budget to actual for the year. You also could include an operating metric, such as surplus deficit metric or an operating margin metric. They both measure whether the school is living within its means, but the surplus deficit metric is going to show you that measure in dollar amounts, while the margin metric is going to show it as a percentage of your revenue. Yeah, in a percentage. But something you could do that we do at the SCSB We use both of those metrics, but when we do the margin metric, we do it over a period of time. So we look at it over a period of 3 years to see how it's doing. You can't do that really with the with the surplus deficit because it just keeps growing, right? Or hopefully if it's not negative. So it's not really something that you can use over a period of or for long term like you can the margin metric. The next one, days cash on hand. We all know how important this is. It measures the number of days that the school can operate using the cash that it currently has on hand. Because though of the timing differences or the timing of cash flow, this can give you a false sense of security, which is why when we talked about that cash flow, looking at a day's cash on hand is good, but examining your cash flow projections over a period of time, those really go hand in hand to see how your school is doing. And then debt service coverage. This tells you the ability of your school to cover annual debt payments. This is one that may be required by stakeholders, so that would be a helpful one to include on your dashboard. Then it's a good idea to know your reserve levels. This would be your unrestricted fund balance, basically, and it just tells you what your financial cushion is for your school should anything happen. And then your major cost drivers. This would be like your percentage of personnel, like the percentage of revenue that goes to personnel costs or the percentage of revenue that goes to facilities costs, things like that. That would be what those are. And as you're choosing your metrics for your dashboard, you want to think about things like what do your stakeholders need? What risks are the most relevant to your school? And you also, when you're looking at those metrics with your board, you want to make sure that they understand what those metrics are measuring and what it means for that metric to be in range. I'm actually going to go back to the last slide really quick. Some tips for tracking your metrics and trends. Don't think of your metrics simply as a snapshot. You want to make sure you're comparing them from month to month or year over year to see if any trends can be identified. Snapshots will show you what the conditions are today, but trends can reveal risks for tomorrow. You want to identify any patterns that are indicating risk early, if there are any. And if you find that any of your metrics are falling out of range especially on an ongoing basis, then you really need to start a discussion so that you can identify the root cause of those metrics not being within the ranges that are expected. And then after that, you can start developing solutions for how you're going to get that metric back in the range that it should be in. All right. Now we'll move on to informed decision making. Your financial reporting should help your leadership to make staffing decisions, adjust spending where necessary. If you want to plan for an expansion, the reporting should help you know if you're going to be able to do that expansion. And it also helps you protect reserves. So in order for your reports to do this, they need to be timely and they need to be simple enough that they can be compared consistently over time. And the last thing I want to talk to you about is the fiscal calendar. We have talked about this before, but it is an important part of this process. The fiscal calendar can help you ensure that your deadlines are met, that your compliance is maintained, and that your governance actions align. It can be as simple as you want it to be, or it can be as detailed as you want it to be. I've given up here on this slide, it shows some ideas of what you might want to include in your fiscal calendar. The first one is your budget development timeline. If you don't put anything else on your calendar, this is one that I recommend that you do have. Your budgets take time and you want to make sure that you start out early enough on your budgets so that you can create the most accurate budgets possible. You can do your forecast update schedule on here, board approvals, audit deadlines, grant reporting, state reporting. I know there are a few of you sometimes that I have to talk to because you miss those state reporting deadlines. So that might be a good idea to have that one on there for all of you. And then your debt payments aren't, if you have bonds, then they're not necessarily paid monthly. And if they're only paid every 6 months, then you definitely want to make, or annually, you want to make sure that you know when those payments are coming due. So that as you're doing your cash forecasting as well, you can be aware of when those are coming due. You could put your payroll cycles on there. And if you have any fiscal policy reviews that you need to do throughout the year, you could put those on there as well. Having a strong fiscal calendar, though, is going to help reduce any last minute pressure, which is why it's so important to your budgeting process. Because again, you do need to start it as early as you can. It's going to help you improve your oversight. It's going to clarify who's responsible for what, because you can put those items on there of who is responsible for whatever item you have on that calendar. And it also helps support strong internal controls by institutionalizing the timing and the accountability and oversight and compliance into the school's financial management process overall. Some final takeaways for you. The budget brings the vision to, the budgets bring vision to life by being aligned with the mission of the school, but they need to be based on realistic assumptions. Your forecasts help your school to manage its risk, and they should be accrual-based and transparent, and there should be transparent communication between leadership and the business office to ensure that those forecasts are as accurate as possible. Your reporting supports decisions and should include clear reporting dashboards that create clarity through meaningful metrics. And then you want a structured fiscal calendar to help provide accountability and to ensure that financial tasks are completed in a timely manner. So effective financial reporting or effective financial leadership is going to ensure that every dollar that your school spends supports the mission of the school, not only today, but into the future. That's all I have. We finished really early. I kind of thought we would, but I wasn't sure, so I didn't want to promise anything. I hope it was helpful. I know there's a lot that you've heard before and you already know, but my goal really more with this presentation was to kind of have you think of these things in a different way and not just as an exercise, but think about how they really, what you do really adds to that story of your school and helps ensure that you're keeping the promises that you made within, that the school made within that charter agreement. So I'm hoping I achieved that. If not, thanks for being here anyway. So what I did want to tell you that if you have any questions, also I'd be happy to answer those, but I know you guys really have questions, but I always want to put that out there. So next month, we are going to be going over our annual financial overview. We're very close to having our the financial portion of the charter school accountability framework populated. So they should be available to you for you to see very soon. We do plan on sending out an email to you to let you know that they're ready and available for you to look at. And that meeting will be on February 26th at 1 p.m. We do have somewhere in the next few months, we're going to have the the spring finance training coming up. That's going to be after the legislature is done with what they're doing, I'm sure. So not sure what month that'll be, but it's going to be coming up soon. I do have 2 more meetings that we have scheduled for this fiscal or this school year that I don't have topics for. I have things in mind, but they're not set in stone. So if there's anything that you guys would like to have a meeting about, I would be happy to entertain those ideas. And with that, again, I don't see that I have any questions. So I hope you guys have a great month and we'll see you in February. Thank you.